Carolyn.
We're ready to go, Floyd?
Ready?
Welcome everyone today to the Collinsville Friends of the Museum. I guess the first thing I need to tell you is Dan's out of town. That's why I'm up here doing this. If you forgot, you elected me your vice president, so I guess I'm supposed to give you up. So we're trying to get through this today. First thing we need to do, we need to acknowledge our host and our hostesses. And I believe they're Ida Geiger, Francis Roper, and Mildred Oslo. And I think they're all sitting up here at the table. Would you give them a little thank you? And I guess start at the same table if there are any new members or any guests at this first table here. And Arvel, how about your table? No, there's no one there. There's no one there. And Jack Geiger, do you have someone? Glad to see Jack Geiger. Right in front of him. No, there's no one there. Mrs. Paul, do you have anyone new at your table? And do you have anyone at your table? This table back here. God, we've known each other for the longest time. A couple other things. I get a more serious note here for a minute. I want to recognize some people who have passed. Richard Bertram. I also want to recognize Arvel Wrigley's mother. I happen to personally know this woman when I was a little boy growing up. Tell you a quick story. When you're 8 or 10 years old and you're a little boy, you get into all sorts of things, and she just kind of lived across the street from us. And you know, it took me the longest time to figure out how my dad always found out about all these things when he got at home. And I finally figured out one day it was his mother was calling my dad on the telephone. And she was real nice lady. Also, I want to acknowledge one of our members has passed, Milton Stamen, and it's really a loss. Now I guess I need to go back to the hostesses and find out the procedure of how we are going to eat. We're going to do this. What do I do? Just pull one. I'll let them do it. Okay, we're gonna do the first table, and then we're gonna do our prayer. And I guess we need Linda Altenberger to lead us in our prayer.
We're so grateful that we have this privilege of coming together with you. We're so thankful that we live in a part of the country where this weather is natural for us, and that you are all these people that are not natural. We thank you for that. We want to have the knowledge of care that food and bless them and bless us. And we just say that this is the long way hard. And we give you the praise.
Thank you. And what's nice about this job is you get to go first. And so after that, we're going to do table one. Is that table one? Where's table one? Under your flower in the center, table one. Table one. And then table eight. Table 8 will be next. Table 4. Table 6. Table 2. Table 2. Table 3. Table 5. Table 7. Table 9.
Did they come? Yeah. Come in.
And we're going to do our business meeting. We'll get the reading of the minutes by our secretary, Dolores Kirby.
November 4th, 1996, Friends of the Collinsville Historical Museum met on November 14th, 1996 at 6:30 p.m. in the Florence Burkholder Room of the Collinsville Memorial Public Library. Vice President Don Coops opened the meeting. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag was given, and the grace prayer was given by Linda Altenberger. Guests and new members were introduced. Leora Graham and Viola Tucker served as hostesses and decorated the tables in a fall season theme. Boomerang's Restaurant served the buffet dinner. President Dan Hayden conducted the business meeting. The minutes of the September the 10th, 1996 meeting were read. Bob Lessers moved the minutes be approved as read. The motion was seconded and carried. The treasurer reported a balance of $5,299.31 in the general fund as of November the 4th, 1996, and a CD balance of $1,800.08 as of October 31st, 1996. Bud Reserve moved the treasurer's report be accepted and filed for audit. Motion was seconded and carried. Committee reports. Museum. Floyd and Bernice Perino presented the Then and Now program to the Madison County Genealogy Society of Edwardsville, Illinois. The microfilm of the Collins family, the Lemus family, and City Hall records are completed and have been placed in the genealogy room of the Collinsville Library. Floyd thanked all who have helped in the museum at various times. He invited everyone to visit the museum as it has been trimmed for Christmas. Arlo Wrigley reported that the museum received compliments from the Ohio State Historical Society for their help in furnishing pictures and articles of information on the Robert Prager hanging in Collinsville on April the 18th, 1918. Some of this information was used in the Timeline magazine published by the Ohio State Historical Museum. Irving Dillard shared some comments on his recollection of this incident. Doris Bauer reported that the Thomas A. Beard gravestone had been properly placed on the side of the grave. A thank you note will be sent to Bob Kerr for his help. She also announced that the Route 66 magazine with the ketchup bottle is available at a cost of $3 each. Ina Fletcher still needs backup telephone callers. Hospitality Committee reported that hostesses for 1997 meetings have been secured. Linda Altenberger is in need of a permanent museum sitter for the fourth Wednesday of each month. President Van Hayden introduced Monsignor Eichhorn, Vice President of the World's Fair Society, as a guest speaker. Monsignor Eichhorn presented an interesting and very informative program on the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. He displayed many mementos from the fair. A Nippon tea set and pitcher on loan from Irving Dillard will be placed in the glass cabinet in the museum. Reports of the nominating committee: Charles and Wilma Cook. Don Coons has accepted the office for vice president, and Patty Coons has accepted the office of treasurer. Ray Lackaman moved that the report of the nominating committee be accepted and that Don and Patty be reelected. The motion was seconded and carried. Lucille Stamen installed Don and Patty in their respective offices. Lola Wrigley was the winner of the miniature reproduction of the ABC framing building. Meeting adjourned at 9:15 p.m. Respectfully submitted, Doris Kirby reporting.
We need a motion to accept, and we need a second.
Yeah, I think there's a correction, or I hope I did
here, Austin W. Beach, DEA, what did I say? Austin W. Beach is the name of the name.
Okay, sounds like that.
And lemon, it's not lemon, it's lemon.
Well, it's Lemen.
Yeah, lemon. It's lemon.
Okay.
Okay, and we have a treasurer's report. Patty?
Balance on hand as of November 4th, 1996, $5,299.31. We received $564 for meals. We received $35 for dues. In memorials, we received $50 in memorial for Richard Bertram, $95 for Estelle Wrigley, $135 for Milton Stamen. Acknowledgement of Ruth Windler's 90th birthday, we received $10. We received $100 as a Christmas remembrance from Vertus Bowers. $495.20 was received from sales from the miniature buildings. The donation box, we received $27.50. We sold 2 books in the amount of $48. We received $50 for reimbursement for microfilm copies. The interest on the checking accounts are as follows: September, $6.43, October, $5.99, November, $5.89, December, $6.12. Our total receipts come to $1,634.13. Our disbursements, we paid Boomerang $511.50, Floyd Sperino $33.27, the Secretary of State $5, Microtech $217.40, ABC Framing $3.48. Total disbursement $770.65. Balance on hand as of today, January 14th, $6,162.79. Our CD balance as of December 31st, 1996, $1,806.87.
We need a motion to accept, and we need a second. Thank you. Hey, do we have any old business? Is there any old business to discuss? Is there any new business to discuss? Okay, Museum Curator Floyd Soprano has a couple things he'd like to say.
Thank you, Al. We try to put into the newsletter the important projects that we have going, so we don't take up too much time. We have a bunch of people today, we'll give you all the time we can. But I want to publicly thank Ken Buell and Jack Geiger and Ralph Howery for their contribution to making this live program, Collinsville Denendal, into a video. And especially Mr. Howery for his expertise doing an excellent professional job on a 26-minute video for classrooms. And for a cost of $33, we have 17 videotapes to put in the public schools. So this is a wonderful project, and I hope at a later date you will get to see this 26-minute professional videotape in one of our programs later. We are sending Mr. Howery a letter of thank you from the board, and if we have more cooperation like that, we can make these really wonderful things. I want to call your attention to the museum display for this month. Irving Dillard so graciously gave us a ladies' riding desk from the Trinity sector, from the Look Dillard family. It's a beautiful piece of furniture, and it's on display for the first time. And also there is a vintage outfit on Our Lady mannequin from the turn of the century that you've never seen, which has not been on display before, from the Dieter Dave collection of the vintage clothing. Also in the museum, you will see the miniature buildings. There are new ones. There is the Keller Home for you to see, and also the high school has been done in the old high school look without the addition. You know, a lot of us graduated from the school where it didn't have the new modern addition on the side. So they do have that available, and it's my understanding that there will be more churches. They're on display in the museum. You can order those from the hobby or from the Lavender Rose. Also, Irving Dillard has given us some very heavy, wonderful storage file cabinets, which are now in the storage area of the museum, and we will utilize those very much, and we thank you early. But do stop and see the museum and the new display. The museum will be open.
Thank you, Floyd. Arnold, did you have anything?
Well, probably do, but I can't think.
Okay, we'll put you on the shelf for a minute. Let's get to our guest speaker. I want to say a couple things before bringing him up here. After talking to him, I've met Mr. Jokerst a couple years ago, and I kind of relate to some of the things that he's done. His family started out in a grocery store. I'm in a grocery store right now, except I'm not in the grocery store business. The grocery store that I was in was kind of in competition with him. So we kind of got a little tie there. Mr. Jokerst also was involved in politics here in Collinsville. He was a finance director on one of the city councils. And as some of you know, that I am running for an elective office here in town too. So we have a tie there. The part that I haven't figured out is, I've been sitting and trying to figure out all the different places that his father or his family or his father and his partners did their business as far as selling groceries. The part that I haven't figured out yet is, after I get done with my money, I take it to the bank. Well, evidently this guy and or his family took their money and put it inside of a building, one of these buildings down here in downtown Collinsville. And one day they went to that building and they got into a different business, in the loan business. And basically, I don't know how they did all that, and there's all kinds of stories. And now I understand that this gentleman has gone from his family, from being in the grocery business to being in the finance business. And now this guy's in a farming business. Now he's back. I don't know if he's growing it and eating it or growing it and selling it, okay? So let's take a few minutes and listen to what this man's got to say, and maybe he can answer some of those questions. Mr. Bill Jokerst.
Thank you very much, Don. I don't recall ever getting an introduction quite like that. But I'll say one thing, he was able to get his political message across. And if he can continue to do that, he'll run on top of the ticket time. The comment that was made just a minute ago about the wonderful speaker you're going to hear, boy, that was a very nice comment. I really didn't pay him to say that. I hope I don't disappoint you. So one of your members this morning, about 10 o'clock, Frank Patol, stopped in my office. And he said, Bill, I have the opportunity to either come hear you at this meeting or listen to Bob Despain in another meeting. He isn't here, so I can say that I didn't do great with. But anyway, I want to thank you very much for the wonderful lunch. It's excellent. I'm not sure who served that, but they certainly did a beautiful job on that. I can understand why all of you came out in this weather. And I was also very happy to be able to take a few minutes with you and tell you a little bit about one of the businesses in Collinsville that was in existence in the time of 1911 to 1939. The business of groceries and the meat business, of which my father had a lot to do with. And when they called me and asked me to say a few words, I did some checking. I had to, of course, talk to a few people that had shopped there, and I also talked to a few people who were involved in it. And I actually learned some things myself that I wasn't aware of. The ideal market itself, as I said, began in 1911, and it lasted 28 years to 1939. It's had its location in two different places. It started originally at 416 East Main Street in Collinsville. That's in the block there about where the new office township building is. I think there was a McMacken Buick there or something in that area. That's where it originated from, and it stayed there for about 12 years, till 1923. Things were good then, and they were making money, and they needed to expand. So they bought the building at 109 East Main Street, and they came up closer to town, and that's the location where the Home Federal Savings and Loan Association vacated when they went to their new building. And they stayed there until 1939. So total years in business was about 28 years. The owners of the business were three men, young men. And I was surprised even at that. You just kind of leave those things pass until you actually look into them. My father, being the oldest of the group when they originated, and he was 24, was Jokerst, Gaskell, and Shea. My father, of course, being the oldest, and he had the most experience in that type of business. So I guess if he was in the banking business, we would have called him or titled him their CEO, their Chief Executive Officer. The other men, of course, had their own talents and personalities, and they mixed very well. But really, to understand the ideal market, we really would have to understand the economy of that time. You'd have to understand the people who were their customers, and you'd have to understand the town in which it was located. The economy between the dates of 1911 and 1939 was an economy that was up and down. And right in the middle of it, of course, was the Great Depression. Some of you, of course, remember that. Some don't. But those were tough times. The people who were their customers, the ideal market, was a large group of people, starting with farmers, coal miners, lawyers, teachers, bankers, business people, and hardworking people. They had a huge variety of customers. And most of all, during those days, the customers intended to patronize their own ethnic store. By that I mean, if you were an Italian, you always found an Italian store to go to, possibly the Veranda Berta store. And the reason they did that was twofold. One, that store had the kind of merchandise that they were wanting to buy, certain types of pasta, certain types of cheese, certain types of those kind of things that maybe Italians like better. And then, of course, there were others, like the Lithuanians. One of the stores was Sam Galanats and Henry Keynes and so on. They were able to talk Lithuanian to these people and were able to determine what type of cut of meat they wanted and so on. So in those days, there was a large amount of small stores. And most of them were ethnic type stores where the Germans went to the Germans and the Italians to the Italians and so on. The ideal market, honestly, was probably the first time that three young men from three different backgrounds would try to start a business and to attract all the different customers regardless of nationality. It was written in the Edwardsville Intelligencer, and I just happened to read it here a few days ago when I was doing some looking up some of the information, that they said that it was very hard for them to put together a more stronger combination of these type of men for this type of business. Jokerst, Gaskell, and Shea. I would like to spend just a few minutes with you and talk about them in regards to their business and civic affairs. First of all was Steve Shea. Steve, if you can imagine, was only 20 years old when he entered into the contract to become the ideal market. And I was able to talk to Catherine Shea here just the other day. Catherine, of course, was Harold's widow. Harold died here just a few years ago, or not even a few years ago. And Harold, of course, was one of the sons of Steve. And she was able to bring out to me, and because it's a historical program, she was able to reach in and get the articles of agreement that were signed by the three people, the three men, on the 27th day of November, 1911. And I thought that was interesting. My father's signature and the other two, this was actually the agreement they went into when they started the Ideal Market. Shea was born in Lehi, Oklahoma in 1891. And he attended the St. Peter and Paul Catholic School when he came here at the age of 13. He worked for Jokerst Market after he left the Catholic school, grade school. Jokerst Market being Ben Jokerst, that was an uncle, one of my father's older brothers, that ran a market on the southwest corner of Center and Clay. There used to be a two-story brick building there across from where Shalott Plumbing is today. I think there was a cleaners in it later on. I remember the old building because at the top you could still read Jokerst Market, and for many years I thought it was my father's, but it wasn't. That was Ben Jokerst's building, and Steve, as a young boy, right out of grade school, began to work there for my Uncle Ben. He spent 5 years there with my Uncle Ben until they started the Ideal Market. He married in 1913 Emma Shippendecker of Caseyville, and they had 3 children, Carol, Bill, and Mary Ann. Carol, as I said, just died a few years ago. Bill, of course, the younger brother, was killed in World War II in the South Pacific. And Mary Ann, his only daughter, died when she was in high school. I can vaguely remember Mary Ann. She had cancer and died as a very young girl. Shea had certainly was civic-minded. He was the director of the Collinsville Building and Loan Association. He was also a director of the State Bank. He was a member of the St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church and a member of the Knights of Columbus. And he twice ran for the City Council of Collinsville. And on a number of occasions, of some people who I've talked with said that Shea had a jolly humor, and that he actually was the life of the Ideal Market. Steve died in 1940 at the age of 49. Steve Gaskell, the second partner, who was 22 years old when they began the organization, was born here in Collinsville in 1889. He attended the Holy Cross Lutheran School. And after putting his books aside, he took up the meat cleaver and worked for Uncle Ben, too, there at Jokerst Market. And he started about the same time that Steve Shea did. So they were friends, young boys, just starting there in the market together. Mr. Gaskell married Percille Kornheim, who I know Mr. Dilliard would know was one of our past librarians. He was a good trombone player, played in a number of bands. He left the Ideal Market temporarily in World War I and served in France for his country, came back and started back at the store. And then when the store closed in 1939, he opened his own store on St. Louis Road in the parking lot now of the Baptist Church, and he died in 1953 at the age of 64. And then the third partner, my father was 24, and as I said, he was the oldest of the 3. He was born right here in Collinsville, just over here on Clinton Street, in 1887. He was one of 8 boys from Valentine and Mary Jokerst. 2 of the young boys died in infancy, and the rest of them were raised right here in Collinsville. He graduated from the public school, Webster School. He attended the Presbyterian Church. And at 15 years of age, he left Collinsville and went to St. Louis to work in the store of W.H. Velde, which was one of the more important leading retail grocery stores in South St. Louis. Of course, he had to speak German then, and he could do that. And he worked for Mr. Velde for about 7 years. I can remember my father telling me so much about Mr. Velde. He must have been an excellent businessman, because he built into my father the type of businessman he was. And he always told me, he said, Bill, Mr. Velde always told me to count everything you buy and count everything you sell. Make sure that you check everything, not once but twice. And always remember, watch the pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves. And that's a pretty good way of looking at things, especially if you want to have a successful business. He stayed at Velde's for about 7 years, and then he came back to Collinsville. And sure enough, he went to work for my Uncle Ben there at the store. I don't know why they needed so many people, but they did. And my dad started working there along with Shea and Gaskell, and he was there about 2 years until Ben decided to trade the store. He was getting out of the grocery business. He traded the store to a man from way up northern Illinois by the name of Lewis Peck, who probably some of you realize that was Peck's Market. He traded it for a farm in Warren, Illinois, which was right on the border between Wisconsin and Illinois. And there's one other item to that is that Mr. Peck brought with him a very lovely lady, a daughter, who later on became Marguerite Esterline. That was Herb Esterline's wife. So there's kind of a little bit of there. My father was a member, of course, of the Chamber of Commerce and of the Commercial Club in those old days. He was a director of the Union Savings and Loan Association. I know he was a charter member of the Lions Club. He was president of the school board from 1930 to 1950, and we were just talking, he worked with Mr. Doris there. Mr. Doris was the superintendent of schools when my father was the president, and I know he spoke so highly of him. He was a good ball player. He wasn't an excellent ball player. He was a very close friend of Art Fletcher's, and matter of fact, both of them went to try out for the Phillies at the same time. My father wasn't fast enough or good enough, but he was a decent player, but he was a great bowler. He was an excellent bowler, and I have many of his trophies at home. He left the Ideal in 1938. He was the first one to leave. It was when the bigger stores began to come into play, Tri-City and Kroger and so on, and there just wasn't enough profit there for 3 families. So my father left and started his own market there at the corner of St. Louis Road and Main Street. And as I look out there and see some of his, I work there myself, and I can see some of his old customers. Mary Monroe there, Steve Merritt, and a number of people. There's a guy raising his hand over there. And it just kind of makes me feel good about that. My father was there until 1955. He died in 1962 at the age of 74. That's a little bit about the people who worked in his, the people who actually owned the Ideal Market. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of his employees. When my father died and he was laid out, there was so many people came by to shake my hand and say, "I used to work for your dad." I guess if I'd have realized he'd been in business, say, 28 years, and the number of people he had employed, I would have realized it was probably the truth. But for a while, I was beginning to think everybody was just saying it. But some of the employees' names maybe are familiar to some of you. Lefty Zukas, Red Senior, Frank Ungerot, Clyde Weiser, Louis Becker. Louis Becker, I remember Louis. He was the son of the first mayor of Collinsville, and after the Ideal closed, Louis went to work for the State Bank. I remember that. Ed Pellin. Ed Pellin worked with my father and eventually became the manager of Tri-City Grocery Company. Kroger, thank you. See, that's one thing when you're talking to the Historical Society. You gotta be real careful of what you say. Especially with Lucille Stamen sitting here, who's done such a beautiful job in putting the history of Collinsville in the paper. Lucille, it's been wonderful. Some of the other names, Oliver Hughes, and I see Nona out here. Nona was a close friend of our families, and my mother always said the most beautiful girl in town. She hadn't changed any, had she? Dale Louth, Vince Lohman, Bill Kornheim, Bill, of course, being the Steve Gaskell's stepson, Reinhard Wieseman, and then one lady. I know there was more than one lady, but this one lady I always remember was Minnie Demetrius, or Minnie Dematis. I don't know how you pronounce it. Minnie Demetrius. She was a lovely, I always think of, there was 2 librarians here that I've always liked so well at your library. Mrs. Burkholder, and I see Mrs. Burkholder somewhere out there, and Merce Bowers. She was a lot like them. Very personal. You'd love to go in and talk with her. She took all of the sales over the telephone, and then she did a lot of the bookwork and so on. And she was a lovely person. I remember her just as a child as I would come in here and she'd always take me to the cookie box and I'd always get cookies. So naturally I remember that. But anyway, those are some of the things. People in those days, I mean, I'm talking about customers. As we said, there were a lot of farmers. I can remember the Fedders and the Weisers, the Forbers. These were farmers out toward the Troy area who would come in and they would bring in their produce and trade it for things that my father and the other men had at the store. For instance, they'd bring in potatoes, a wagon load of potatoes, eggs, strawberries, apples, whatever they were growing, and then they would trade them for things that they couldn't produce on the farm, and that was quite a way of doing business. You wouldn't do that today, of course, but that's the way they did it then. There was a number of boarding houses in the town where people would stay, and then they would eat breakfast, lunch, and supper, or whatever it may be. And these boarding houses were very good customers. I can remember my father talking about two, particularly the Renfro boarding house that I probably think was somewhere around Aurora Street. Maybe Mr. Dugard would know that. Jack Renfro, our superintendent who just passed away, that was his grandma. And I remember my father saying he ate there quite a bit too. And that was a big customer. And Mrs. Tobinick also had a boarding house of at least 10 people. That was another customer, and I think Mrs. Friedemeyer, I think, was Tobinick, Mabel, and that was her mother. And I remember they delivered there quite often. Many people walked downtown in those days. They didn't have parking lots or cars or things, so they would come down, and I've seen pictures, a number of pictures, and the ladies would do the shopping, and they were dressed like they were going to church. I don't think there was a lady I ever saw without a hat. And even the men, 90% of them wore hats. So I guess they were, dressed accordingly, although the stores were not heated like they were. So if it was going in the store today, you had to dress for them because it was cold in the store, and in the summertime it was hot. But anyway, I remember so many, and some of the pictures that I brought here, you may want to take a look at opening day of the Ideal at their new location in 1923. All the ladies were dressed, with long dresses and hats and so on. A lot of the customers called in their orders though later, so they had a large telephone business, and therefore they had to deliver. They took a lot of pride in delivering their groceries. Pride, by that I mean they were there on time and the grocery was right. I remember several stories my father told about delivering. They had 2 mules and 2 wagons when they first started out, and they kept the mules there in the livery stable downtown somewhere. And Red Senior was the man who used to take care of them. He fed them, took care of them, harnessed them in the morning, and made sure they were at the shop ready for the young guys to go out and start delivering. My dad used to always say, he had a group of young fellows there working. Sometimes, when they go to deliver, they wouldn't come back quite as fast as they should. Well, those mules were trained, and if they stayed at one place too long, the mule just came on back. Come right back to the alley and back right up against the loading dock there and wait for another customer to be placed, and that was kind of a funny thing. The other thing was when the trucks began to take over and they had to get rid of the mules, no one had taken care of them but Red Senior, and so they put a sign out on the store there to sell the mules for whatever it was, $10, $50. I don't know what a mule was brought at that time. But they found out that no one could harness them other than Red Senior. Once they got the harness on, they were perfect. They would go wherever they wanted to go and so wherever he wanted them to go. But before that, they just couldn't do that. So they couldn't sell them. They tried everybody to try to do it, and Red said the only way you're going to work is if I go with them. So they wanted to sell them to the mine, and the 3 guys. I'm talking about Jokerst, Gasco, and Shea said, no, we're not going to sell them to the mine because they knew that if they sold them there, they'd go down in the mine and they'd never see daylight again. Mm-hmm. So they gave them away. They gave them to a farmer in Missouri where he couldn't harness them either. They just lived happily ever after. One other thing was they killed their own cattle. They killed their own calves. Not cattle, but their calves for veal. They did that in the basement of the store. And during the Depression times, people used everything, you know. I mean, they made soup out of this and so on. And Dad used to say they used to leave things there, and so many people would come up and say, well, could they have that? And they did. And I don't know whether I ought to tell this story or not, but when they killed the calves, in those days, they killed them with a sledgehammer. And you had to hit them hard, you know, to kill them on the first swing. There was one fellow in town they always called him. That was Jack Renfro. That was Doc Renfro, who was the dentist eventually, but Dad said he was left-handed. He was strong as a bull, and he said when he hit them, they never got up. So they always called Jack to come down and do that. Merchandise, of course, in that day, you know, was sold mainly by bulk. You know, today everything is wrapped for you, you know. Well, you couldn't do that in the meat department. Everything is brought out and cut for you and so on. Pickles were in a barrel there in the brine, you know, you just reached in with your hand, got a pickle and ate it, I guess. Dried apricots, I used to like those. Orange apricots, you know, my sister and I go in and get a handful, you know. And cookies were the same way. The cookies would be just laid out in boxes. They'd have a cellophane so you could see what kind of cookie it was, but I mean, you just reached in and got them in a bag and everything was weighed, and that's how it was done, sugar, lard, whatever it may be. So it was a different type of business than what we're used to today. One other thing was, and I have a picture over here of their display cases in the front. In those days, and one of the ladies here said her father, Gallinat, ran a store too, a long time, and I remember the store very well, right here on Main Street, a very excellent store. And but the Ideal had two great big windows that they used for display. I don't know who did their displaying. I know it wasn't my father. It may have been Shay, because Mr. Gaskell was strictly in the meat business and he was an expert in that. But everybody that would come downtown, walk downtown, would like to go see the Ideal display at the Ideal Market. And for instance, I remember on Christmas they would have a bunch of trains running there, you know, for the kids and so on. At Easter, they would have live rabbits, live chickens, Easter eggs all painted and so on in the front window, and so on. So they did have a knack there that maybe they could have used Floyd on in those days, but someone was doing a pretty good job in regards to their displaying. They sponsored many teams. They were great sponsors. My dad, as I said, was the ball player among them and the bowling fella, so I guess he was interested in doing that. He bowled on a league in St. Louis, and they were the first Illinois team ever to win the league championship in St. Louis group. They were quite happy about that, and that was in 1922. And in going over the pictures there and seeing who was on that team, and I remember Dad telling me who they were, so I had a marker ready. But I was looking in the book here that Lucille made for the United Illinois Bank a year or so ago, and I remembered a picture in there that was exactly the same as one of those men on the team, and that was Lee Bailey, the fellow who was killed in the mine accident. He was on the 1922 team, and he was killed in 22, so he was a winner on that team, and he was replaced then by Jack Renfro in 1923. I looked that up just to see what they did. But anyway, they did sponsor a lot of teams, and baseball, of course, in those days was big because television wasn't here. People didn't have the way of traveling or the money. So on Sundays and so on, that was what everybody went to. So, you know, the Colts and the Ideal team and the Reds and all of those were great things to see. And that kind of was a great thing for the Ideal Market to do. One thing I failed to mention, and I don't know why I did, I just overlooked my notes here on my father. I forgot to tell you that after an unsuccessful marriage that he married my mother in 1929, Pearl Hepplewhite, and they had two children. My sister Joan, who was born in 1931, and I came along in 1933. Normally, I will ask some questions, and he kind of came up with it. He wondered why I didn't follow in the footsteps of my father in the grocery business, and took on a different type of business. And I can tell you that. I know exactly the day it happened. I used to work for my father at his market there on St. Louis Road and Main Street. And my sister and I both did, although I think she worked harder and longer than I. But in those days, in those days, we closed on Saturday evening about 6 o'clock. So Saturday, my sister and I were still working there around 5:45. And whatever was left in the meat counter, that's what we had for Sunday dinner. That's just the way it was. So it seemed like for about 3 or 4 weeks, we were eating chicken. And Joan and I got together and said, can you believe it? But there's one little fat chicken left in the meat counter, and we're going to get that tomorrow as sure as that. So we had to try to figure out a way of getting rid of it. So about 5:45, while my father was out in the warehouse there cleaning up and getting ready to close, I will never forget Mrs. Norberry got off the bus, and probably some of you knew her, and came into the shop. I was behind the meat counter there talking, and she came up and said, Bill, can you recommend something for Sunday dinner? She says, I'm going to have some of my friends over, and I want to make a nice dinner. And oh boy, I mean, here's the chance of the life. So I said, Mrs. Norberry, we have a real nice chicken. Or you can make chicken and dumplings, you can make chicken stuffed with, stuffing, you can do whatever you want with it, but I think it'll do the trick. And she said, well, fine, why don't you get it out and weigh it for me? So I went in and picked it up and put it on the scale, and I said, well, it weighs a little over 2 pounds. And she said, let me take a look at it. So I showed it to her. She said, well, it's just not big enough. I think I'll want something else. Oh, no. I looked over to Joan, and she was shaking her head, and I thought to myself, hey, maybe this is where my politicians get me. I thought to myself, I said, well, wait a minute. We do have one other chicken out in the warehouse. And I'll go out and see if maybe it'll be big enough. So I took this chicken and kind of tucked it by my, went out to the warehouse there, and I took paper and I stuffed that chicken. It was that big. And I brought it back in, and I said, Mrs. Norberry, how about this chicken? And she looked at that chicken and said, oh, that's wonderful. I'll take them both. See, that's my moment. I left the grocery business. So that's about all I have to say about the ideal. Unless there's any questions or anything, you can ask me or ask Lucille. I think she knows more about the history. And thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm going to join your organization. I don't know why I haven't joined it already.
What happened to the second chick? Yeah.
I'm still looking for it.
The fact of the matter is, Mr. Jokerst, whenever we bring someone in to speak to our group, first year is free. So here's your card. Also, I do believe we're going to do a raffle here in a minute, and I do believe that Irving would like to say a couple words.
First thing I want to say is that Bill brought back such wonderful memories for me. Because I grew up at Church in Aurora where the high-rise is. And when they spoke in McMacken, Buick, as well as the idea of the market, is brought back in the happy one. And so I thank you for that. That's the memory as well as your account tonight. I want to mention a couple of things right quick. This year, 1997, is the 300th year of the white oak up on Church Street. Many of you have been there. Keep that in mind. We had tree experts half a dozen years ago, or before we put the marker there. And they figured out the date of it and all, when the tree began. And the marker says, this tree was 300 years, or was 35 years old the day George Washington was born. So that's the white oak, and if any of you haven't seen it, you'll make it a part of seeing it in 1997. I want to tell you that when we came in here, you couldn't see Josephine Dunham's painting over there because it was covered up by the blackboard. Blackboard was over that way. And thanks to Arlo Wrigley, he went over and moved it, and now you can see it. And we ought to always see that because she, Josephine Bernhardt Dunham, is now 101 years old. She'll be 102 this year. So I'm glad he did that. Now I have something here that won't take long, but I am going to read it because I was going to read it to my daughter and her husband. I saw an advertisement in the paper about a poetry contest in prizes. Some of the rest of you have seen it. It was in the papers, and I cut it out, and here's what I've written. It goes, Dear Howard Ely, that's the name of the man who is in charge. National Library of Poetry, Owing Mills, Maryland. And here's what I've left out. It is so pleasing to see your most inviting announcement of the 1997 poetry contest. At the age of 92 plus, I have been much connected with libraries, colleges, universities, literary activities, biographical writing, enjoyment of poetry, and so on, truthfully around the world, where I have circled the globe from east to west and from west to east. But this will be my first time to enter a poetry contest. What I submit is only 4 lines that I put together when I was a student, also attended church and Sunday school. The biblical account of the birth of Jesus concerns me almost every time I read or heard about it. I made that clear from playing in my short stanza. 6 syllables in lines 1 and 3, 7 syllables in lines 2 and 4. Here they are after most of a century. And here are the 4 lines. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, presents for a baby boy, ? Wish I'd been a wise man. I'd have taken him a toy.
And I don't think I'll try to top that. We have a couple more things. Each time we have a meeting, and I'm sure everyone knows about the little houses, and this year what we're going to try to accomplish that we make sure that all the churches in Collinsville are done in the little buildings. We're getting a little static on that. So we're going to try to get all the churches done. So now we're going to have a raffle and give this away to someone. Does everyone have a ticket? I want to make sure everybody's got a ticket. Okay, let's find out who it is. Mr. Jokerst, what's really interesting about this ticket, everybody wants to know who won. So we got this little thing that we do is, Mr. Soprano and Mr. Wrigley spent a lot of time in the museum changing things and moving things around. And we finally figured out a way how to get them in there. Guess what it is? We take this ticket in there. And they have to come in and see who's going to get this little building. Now, with any other, let's mention one more thing. Our next meeting, and please take your schedule that was on the table. Please take that with you. That will tell you every speaker and every date for this year. Take that home with you. There were some people that were saying they forgot, blah, 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 blah. Take it home, tape it on your wall, tape it on the front of your refrigerator, do something with it. And that way you'll know what we're going to be doing all year. Next month, March 10th, 7 p.m., it'll be an evening meeting. Mary Dodd will be talking about the Rock Spring Cemetery in Troy, Illinois. And if we don't have anything else, if you haven't seen the photos here on the table in the front, they are excellent. And Mr. Jokerst has agreed to allow us, he might even have an extra copy too. If he don't, he is going to allow us to copy them so we can have a copy in the museum. Floyd?
Doris has a correction.
Doris has another correction. That's good. Tell us, Doris.
The Rock Spring Cemetery, CERY, is in Oak Valley. I went there a few of them. The Rock Spring Cemetery they've been working on is in Oak Valley.
And it is spelled E-R-Y.
I don't know who put the newsletter together, but it wasn't me. So, you know, next month, on March 10th, Mary Dowd's going to be coming here talking about a cemetery. I'm not sure where that cemetery is at, but stop by to get a chance, okay? If we have nothing else, we'll adjourn the meeting. Yes. The number? It's on, believe it or not. We take this number. We have Irving Billiard's door in the museum. We put his front door. We put this on his front door in the museum, so it'll be posted there. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, in 94, and keep.
Did he get there?